I'm Cassandra, 29, standing in my family lawyer's office, staring at documents that could save or destroy my family. 3 years ago, my grandfather's inheritance, promised to me for years, was redirected to my perfect sister Lauren. Now their business is collapsing, and they desperately need my signature. The power to determine their fate rests entirely in my hands. After years of being the family disappointment, I now hold everything they value. Should I save them or let them face the consequences of their betrayal? If you've ever been betrayed by family, you know that hollow feeling in your chest. The moment when blood ties suddenly mean nothing. I'd love to know where you're watching from today as I share how my family's ultimate betrayal led to an unexpected moment of reckoning. Hit subscribe if you've ever fantasized about the day your family might finally need you after years of being overlooked. Trust me, what happened next in this lawyer's office changed everything. Growing up with Lauren was like living in perpetual shadow. From our earliest memories, the pattern was established. Lauren excelled at everything, and I was the perpetual runner-up in my parents' eyes. My sister was the definition of the golden child. By third grade, she was already skipping ahead in math and reading, while I struggled with dyslexia that went undiagnosed until high school. Lauren collected academic awards like some kids collected toys. Her bedroom wall became a shrine to her achievements: spelling bee certificates, perfect attendance awards, student of the month recognitions. When she brought home straight A's, my parents would take the entire family out for a special dinner. When I finally pulled my grades up to B's after months of struggle, my dad merely nodded and said, "Now try for A's like your sister." It wasn't just academics. Lauren was the captain of the soccer team, first chair violin in the school orchestra, and somehow still found time to volunteer at the local animal shelter every weekend. She had this effortless charm that drew people to her. Teachers would light up when she entered the room. Other parents would tell my mom and dad how lucky they were to have such an exceptional daughter. "And how are you doing in school, Cassandra?" they'd ask as an afterthought, their tone making it clear they didn't expect much. I tried everything to find my place. I joined a debate team, but my parents attended only one competition, the one where Lauren was receiving an award for community service on the same day. I took up photography and won a local contest, but my father questioned why I was wasting time on hobbies instead of focusing on college applications like Lauren. When I decided to pursue art history in college, my mother sighed and asked if I'd considered accounting instead. Lauren was already interning at a prestigious financial firm as a sophomore. The contrast in how we were treated extended to every aspect of our lives. For Lauren's 16th birthday, my parents threw an elaborate party at the country club and surprised her with a new car. For mine, we had cake at home, and I received money toward my car insurance. When Lauren was accepted to Princeton, my parents paid her full tuition without hesitation. When I got into a state university, they told me to apply for scholarships and loans because it would teach me responsibility. Throughout this childhood of constant comparison, my grandfather Howard was my only ally. While my parents attended Lauren's soccer games and violin recitals, Grandpa Howard would take me to art museums and historical sites. He listened when I talked about my passion for art restoration and preservation. He never once compared me to Lauren. "You've got the eye for detail and the patience this world needs," he'd tell me while we examined paintings together. "Lauren's good at getting attention, but you understand how to preserve what's truly valuable." During my senior year of high school, when I was feeling particularly low after being rejected from my dream college while Lauren was fielding multiple scholarship offers, Grandpa Howard took me for a drive in his vintage Cadillac. "I want you to know something, Cassandra," he said as we parked overlooking the city. "I've set up a trust for you. When I'm gone, you'll have what you need to pursue your dreams without worrying about money. Your sister will be fine. She has your parents wrapped around her finger and plenty of opportunities. But you, my dear, you'll need this foundation to build your own path." That promise became my lifeline during college and the difficult years that followed. While Lauren graduated with honors and immediately landed a job at a top investment firm, I struggled through art history courses while working part-time to cover expenses my scholarships didn't. The thought of eventually having the resources to open my own art restoration studio kept me going. The years of being second best created deep wounds. I developed anxiety about family gatherings, knowing I'd inevitably hear about Lauren's latest promotion or amazing vacation. I stopped sharing my small victories because they always seemed to be overshadowed. When I finally landed an apprenticeship with a respected art conservator, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Lauren just closed a $1 million deal?" I learned to protect myself by withdrawing. I visited less frequently. I kept conversations superficial. I built a wall between myself and the family that consistently made me feel inadequate. The only exception was Grandpa Howard, whom I visited regularly, especially as his health began to decline. Despite my efforts to build my own identity separate from my family's expectations, the years of being the black sheep had taken their toll. I questioned my worth constantly. I sabotaged opportunities because I'd internalized the idea that I wasn't as capable as my sister. I avoided relationships because I assumed eventually everyone would prefer someone more like Lauren, more accomplished, more charismatic, more perfect. This was the foundation of our family dynamic: Lauren, the golden child, basking in constant approval, and me, the perpetual disappointment, holding on to Grandpa Howard's promise as my only hope for eventually proving my worth. What none of us realized then was how dramatically these established roles would shift when my grandfather's health took a sudden turn for the worse, setting in motion a chain of events that would eventually bring us all to that lawyer's office years later. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Grandpa Howard had suffered a massive stroke. By the time I reached the hospital, he was already in the ICU, unresponsive, connected to machines that breathed for him. My parents and Lauren arrived an hour after me, having come directly from Lauren's award ceremony at her firm. "Did you sign the medical forms?" my mother asked immediately, barely glancing at her father's still form. "You know Lauren has the healthcare power of attorney." I hadn't known that. When had that changed? Last I'd heard, I was Grandpa's designated healthcare proxy, since I lived closest to him and visited weekly. The next 3 months became a blur of hospital visits, specialist consultations, and watching my grandfather slowly slip away. I rearranged my work schedule to be there nearly every day. I brought his favorite books and read to him. I played the classical music he loved. The doctors weren't sure how much he could understand, but sometimes his hand would squeeze mine when I spoke. Lauren visited twice during those 3 months. Both times she stayed less than an hour, looking uncomfortable and checking her phone constantly. My parents came weekly, but their visits were brief and businesslike, focusing on discussions with doctors about realistic outcomes and quality-of-life considerations. One afternoon, when I arrived at the hospital, I found my family there with a man I didn't recognize. They seemed startled by my appearance. "Cassandra, this is Jeffrey Thornton," my father said. "A colleague who's helping us update some of Dad's legal matters." "Mr. Thornton nodded politely, but avoided eye contact. They all left shortly after, my mother explaining they were taking Mr. Thornton to lunch to discuss details. When Grandpa Howard finally passed away, it was early morning. I had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, my hand holding his. The nurse gently woke me, her eyes compassionate. "He's gone, honey." It was peaceful. I called my parents, who said they'd handle the funeral arrangements. I was too grief-stricken to argue, though in retrospect, I should have been more involved. The funeral was elegant and well-attended. Lauren delivered a polished eulogy about Grandpa Howard's business acumen and generosity, though she managed to make much of it about her own similar qualities and how she planned to honor his legacy. I noticed she never mentioned our museum trips or his passion for art. When I asked if I could say a few words, my mother whispered, "We've already planned the program carefully, dear. We don't want things to run long." I sat silently through the service, clutching a small sketch Grandpa had done of me when I was 12, wondering why I felt like a stranger at my own grandfather's funeral. 3 days later, we gathered at the offices of Simmons and Walsh, my grandfather's longtime legal firm. Mr. Walsh, a somber man in his 60s who had handled my grandfather's affairs for decades, seemed unusually tense. His assistant distributed copies of the will to each of us. "Before we begin," Mr. Walsh said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to note that this is the most recent will, executed 3 weeks before Howard's passing. It supersedes all previous versions. My stomach dropped. 3 weeks before his death, when he was barely conscious. I glanced at my parents, who were studiously avoiding my gaze. As Mr. Walsh read through the document, I felt increasingly numb. The family business shares, originally promised to be divided with a controlling interest to me, now went entirely to Lauren. The lake house where Grandpa Howard and I had spent countless weekends discussing art and history was now my parents' property. The trust fund he had specifically created to help me establish my art restoration studio was now redirected to the continued growth of the family business under Lauren's direction. By the time Mr. Walsh finished reading, I felt physically ill. Everything Grandpa Howard had promised me, everything that had kept me going through years of being the family disappointment, was gone. In its place was a single bequest, his collection of art books, and a small stipend that wouldn't cover even one semester of specialized training in restoration techniques. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice shaking. Grandpa promised me. The will is quite clear, Cassandra, my father interrupted. Your grandfather obviously reconsidered what would be best for the family legacy. Lauren reached over to pat my hand. Don't worry, Cass. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe we can find you a position in the company. The condescension in her voice broke something in me. When was this will changed? Who was present? Grandpa could barely recognize people at the end. Mr. Walsh looked uncomfortable. I wasn't personally present for the signing. My associate, Mr. Thornton, handled the execution at the hospital. The man from the hospital. The colleague who had been there just weeks before Grandpa died. He wasn't competent to make these decisions, I insisted, tears streaming down my face. You all know that. He would never have done this. Are you suggesting we manipulated Dad? My mother asked, her voice cold. He simply realized that Lauren has the business acumen to grow what he built. You've always been impractical with your art fixation. The conversation devolved from there. I demanded to see medical records, questioned the timing, even threatened legal action. My family responded with increasing hostility, eventually suggesting I was being selfish and ungrateful. Your grandfather wanted the business to thrive, my father said firmly. Lauren has proven herself capable. You never showed any interest. That wasn't true. I'd spent hours with Grandpa discussing sustainable growth models for the company. He'd often said he valued my perspective precisely because it wasn't purely profit-driven. I left the lawyer's office in a daze. Back in my apartment, I pulled out every card, letter, and email from my grandfather. There were dozens mentioning the trust, the business shares, his plans for me. In one email from just 6 months earlier, he'd attached photos of the lake house with the message, making sure the roof is in good shape for when you inherit this old place. Can't wait to see what you do with it. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together what had happened. Medical records showed my grandfather had been on high doses of pain medication during the period when the will was changed. Visitor logs confirmed my family and this mysterious Mr. Thornton had visited multiple times without me knowing. A nurse I'd befriended admitted she'd been concerned about my grandfather signing documents when he was clearly not himself. When I presented this evidence to Mr. Walsh, he expressed concern but said challenging the will would be expensive and difficult without definitive proof of coercion. And frankly, he added not unkindly, family business disputes rarely end well for anyone. The final betrayal came when I visited my grandfather's house before it was sold. Lauren was there, supervising the removal of artwork, pieces Grandpa had specifically told me would be mine someday. Oh, these? She gestured dismissively at a collection of smaller paintings we had selected together over years. They're being appraised for auction. The proceeds will help with the business expansion. Something broke inside me that day. I walked out of my grandfather's house and cut all ties with my family. I changed my phone number, blocked their emails, and moved across the country within 2 weeks. The only communication I had was a brief, formal letter informing them I wanted no further contact. For 3 years, I heard nothing from them. I received no birthday cards, no holiday greetings, not even an announcement when Lauren married. It was as if I had never existed, until suddenly, they desperately needed me back in their lives. Seattle welcomed me with its characteristic rain, 47 straight days of it after I arrived. It felt appropriate for my mood, this constant gray weeping from the sky. I'd chosen the city precisely because it was over 2,000 miles from my family and because it had a growing arts conservation community. I'd also chosen it because nobody there knew me as Lauren's less successful sister. My first apartment was barely more than a converted storage space above a used bookstore in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. The ceiling slanted so sharply that I could only stand upright in about half the room. The bathroom was a retrofitted closet with a shower that never quite got hot. But the rent was just within reach of my meager savings, and the bookstore owner, Margaret, became my first friend in my new life. With no inheritance and only my modest savings, financial reality hit hard. The specialized art restoration certificate program I dreamed of was completely out of reach, at $35,000 per year. Instead, I cobbled together 3 part-time jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop, weekend tours at a local museum, and evening work cataloging books for Margaret. Between them, I made just enough to cover rent, utilities, and ramen noodles. Some weeks I had to choose between laundry and internet access. "You're resilient," Margaret told me one evening as we sorted through a new shipment of art books. "Most people who come here running from something don't last through winter." I hadn't told her much about my situation, but Margaret had a gift for reading people. That night, over cheap wine and leftover pastries from the cafe, I told her everything. The golden child sister, the manipulated will, the family that had erased me once I was no longer useful. "Sounds like you're well rid of them," she said bluntly. "Though I'm sorry about your grandfather. He sounds like he was one of the good ones." She was right on both counts. Still, starting over completely alone at 26 was harder than I'd anticipated. The practical challenges were difficult. Learning to budget with almost nothing, navigating a new city's systems, establishing credit without family support. But the emotional toll was even greater. I'd wake up from dreams where Grandpa Howard was trying to tell me something important, only to find my tiny apartment empty and silent. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text my mother about a funny customer at the coffee shop, only to remember she'd helped take everything from me. Worst of all were the moments of doubt. Had I overreacted? Was I remembering things wrong? Maybe Grandpa really had changed his mind. 6 months into my Seattle life, I hit bottom. I lost my museum job due to budget cuts. My laptop died, making it impossible to search for replacement work efficiently. I developed bronchitis that wouldn't go away, but I couldn't afford to see a doctor. One particularly grim Tuesday, I sat on my mattress on the floor, calculating whether I could make it through the month without electricity. That same evening, Margaret knocked on my door. "I've got a proposition for you," she said, stepping carefully into my tiny space. "I have a client, eccentric old man, loaded with family money. He's got a collection of art books with damaged bindings and water damage. Needs someone with conservation knowledge and careful hands to assess and begin restoration. Pays $25 an hour." It wasn't exactly fine art restoration, but it was adjacent to my field and paid better than anything else available to me. I started the next day, working in the climate-controlled library of Edmund Hayes, a retired surgeon with a passion for rare books. He reminded me a little of my grandfather, observant, patient, appreciative of craftsmanship. "You have a gift for this work," he told me after watching me carefully separate water-damaged pages of a 19th century illustrated botanical text. "Have you considered formal training?" I explained my circumstances, omitting the family drama and simply stating that financial constraints had interrupted my education plans. 3 weeks later, he offered to sponsor my application to the Seattle Art Conservation Certificate Program, including a recommendation letter and assistance with tuition. "I believe in investing in talent," he said simply when I tried to express my overwhelming gratitude. "The art world needs more dedicated conservators." With Dr. Hayes' support, I was accepted into the program and arranged my schedule to continue my coffee shop job while studying. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like my original path was coming back into view. It was during this period that I also began therapy with Dr. Sloan, a no-nonsense counselor who specialized in family trauma. Our sessions were often painful as I unpacked years of conditional love, gaslighting, and the complicated grief of losing my grandfather twice, once to death and once to the revelation that his promises had been overwritten. What your family did was unconscionable, Dr. Sloan said during one particularly difficult session. But their actions don't define your worth. And your grandfather's love for you wasn't invalidated by what happened after his stroke. Slowly, I began to heal. I made friends in my program, other students who valued my eye for detail and never compared me to anyone else. I moved to a slightly better apartment where I could stand upright in every room. I started a small side business repairing damaged books for local collectors, building on the skills I'd learned working for Dr. Hayes. Dating was more complicated. My first few attempts were disasters. I'd either withdraw completely or overshare my family trauma on the first date. I was so accustomed to being the lesser sister that I struggled to believe anyone would choose me if they had other options. Then I met Derek at a conservation workshop. He was a structural engineer who worked on historical building restoration, someone who understood preservation without being directly in my field. Our first conversation was about the challenges of modernizing electrical systems in historical structures without compromising their integrity. No small talk, no awkward attempts at flirtation, just genuine shared interest. You really know your stuff, he said as we exchanged numbers afterward. I'd love to hear more about your approach to balancing preservation with accessibility. 3 dates later, I found myself telling him about my family. I'd intended to keep things light, but something about his attentive presence made the truth spill out. When I finished, I waited for the awkward exit strategy I'd come to expect. Instead, he said, "They sound like terrible people who didn't deserve you. I'm glad you got away from them, but I'm sorry about what it cost you." Simple, direct validation without excessive pity. It was exactly what I needed. With Derek's support, my growing professional network, and continued therapy, I gradually developed something I'd never truly had before: confidence, not based on external validation. I became known in Seattle's small conservation community as reliable, detail-oriented, and innovative. My client list grew beyond books to include paper ephemera, then paintings and mixed media pieces. 2 years after arriving in Seattle with nothing but a suitcase and shattered trust, I had a specialized certificate, a growing business, a decent apartment, a supportive partner, and genuine friends who knew and valued the real me. I still thought about my grandfather often, but the sharp pain had dulled to a bittersweet ache. I still occasionally dreamed about confronting my family, but those fantasies no longer consumed my waking hours. I had finally created a life that was authentically mine, free from the shadow of my perfect sister. I had proven, to myself, if no one else, that I could survive and even thrive without the inheritance that had been promised to me. And then, just as I had truly begun to move forward, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize from my hometown. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Cassandra?" My mother's voice, tight with strain. "We need to talk. It's about the family business. We need your help." The irony wasn't lost on me. After 3 years of silence, my mother's first words weren't an apology or even a greeting, just an immediate statement of need. I almost hung up, but curiosity kept me on the line. "Cassandra? Are you there?" Her voice had a desperate edge I'd never heard before. "I'm here," I replied coolly, "though I'm surprised you remembered my number." She ignored the barb. "The business is in trouble. Serious trouble. We need to discuss it with you in person." Why would I care about the business? Lauren got everything, remember? It's her problem now. "It's complicated," my mother said, sounding exhausted. "There are legal matters involving you. Please just meet with us. We can come to Seattle." The thought of them invading my hard-won new life made my stomach clench. "No. I'm not inviting you into my space." After some negotiation, I agreed to a video call the following evening, partly out of curiosity, partly out of a shameful desire to see them struggling. When their faces appeared on my screen, I was shocked by how much they had aged. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother's face was lined with stress. Lauren, joining from a separate location, looked thin and tense, her perfect appearance noticeably diminished. What unfolded over the next hour was the story of how thoroughly my perfect sister had destroyed our grandfather's legacy. Transcend Investments had been a respected regional investment firm when my grandfather ran it, known for conservative growth strategies and exceptional client retention. Under Lauren's leadership, everything had changed. We wanted to modernize, my father explained, rubbing his forehead. Lauren had ideas about aggressive expansion, new markets, faster growth. Those ideas had included moving client funds into increasingly risky investments without proper disclosures. Lauren had hired friends from business school who commanded enormous salaries but lacked experience. She had leased extravagant new offices in the most expensive building downtown and spent hundreds of thousands on rebranding. The first year actually looked promising, my mother admitted. Returns were up initially. Lauren was featured in Business Monthly as a financial wunderkind transforming her grandfather's staid firm. But the foundation was rotting beneath the shiny new facade. Client complaints began to accumulate. Several large accounts withdrew their funds. The aggressive investment strategies that had shown early gains began to falter in a volatile market. "Why didn't you step in?" I asked my father, who had been my grandfather's right-hand man for decades before retiring. "You must have seen the warning signs." He looked away. Lauren assured us it was just growing pains. She had all these credentials, all these connections. We thought she knew what she was doing. The situation deteriorated further when Lauren married Bradley Westfield, the son of a real estate developer with his own questionable business reputation. Bradley quickly insinuated himself into the company despite having no financial background. He convinced Lauren to diversify into commercial real estate development, my father explained. We leveraged company assets to purchase properties that were supposed to be renovated and flipped quickly. Those properties now sat half-renovated and hemorrhaging money. Contractors had walked off jobs after non-payment. There were lawsuits from investors who claimed they'd been misled about projected returns. Then the SEC started asking questions about some of the disclosures to clients, my mother said quietly. And that's when we discovered Bradley had been falsifying some of the paperwork. Lauren's face crumpled on screen. I didn't know what he was doing. I trusted him. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. Trust misplaced in someone who presented well but ultimately betrayed you. It seemed karma had come full circle. Lauren and Bradley are separated now, my father added. But the damage was done. My parents had mortgaged their house, including the lake house that should have been mine, to try to keep the business afloat. They had drained retirement accounts and personal savings. Nothing had been enough to stem the bleeding. So you've lost everything, I summarized, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and unexpected sadness. But I still don't understand what this has to do with me. This was where the story took a turn I hadn't anticipated. When my grandfather had originally set up the company structure decades ago, he had created a complex ownership arrangement with unusual protections. Certain major changes, including selling the company, merging with another firm, or liquidating major assets, required signatures from all named family members in his original corporate documents. Your name is still on those founding documents, my father explained. It was never removed, even when the will was changed. My grandfather's law firm had recently discovered this oversight when my parents tried to sell the company's headquarters building to pay debts. Despite the revised will giving Lauren control of the business, my signature was still legally required for this transaction, and for any potential sale or restructuring of the company that might save it from complete collapse. So you need my signature to sell buildings, fire people, possibly liquidate the entire company that was stolen from me? I clarified, hardly believing what I was hearing. It wasn't stolen, my mother protested weakly. Your grandfather changed his mind. While heavily medicated and barely conscious, I shot back. After mysterious visits from all of you and a lawyer I'd never seen before. Nobody denied this. If you've ever wanted to witness karma in action, imagine my feelings in that moment. The family who betrayed me, who took everything my grandfather wanted me to have, who cut me off completely when I objected, now they needed me. Their faces on my screen showed the desperation of people who had run out of options. I wish I could say I felt only righteous satisfaction, but the truth was more complicated. Beneath my anger was a current of sadness for what could have been, for the family relationships that had been sacrificed on the altar of greed and favoritism. There was grief for my grandfather's legacy being squandered. And there was a small, stubborn part of me that still cared what happened to them, despite everything. I need time to think, I told them, and ended the call before they could pressure me further. That night, I told Derek everything. We sat on our small balcony overlooking the Seattle skyline, mugs of tea growing cold as I recounted the details of my family's spectacular fall. "What are you thinking of doing?" he asked when I'd finished. "Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell," I admitted. "But another part wants to help because they're still your family," he finished. "Despite everything." I nodded, conflicted. There's also the practical side. If I sign, I might be implicated in whatever financial mess they've created. If I don't sign, the business my grandfather spent his life building disappears completely. Derek considered this. "You don't have to decide tonight. Get more information. Consult a lawyer. Figure out what your grandfather would have wanted you to do." "What would you do?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "I'd make sure whatever happened next was on my terms, not theirs." His words stayed with me as I lay awake that night. For the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Power in relation to my family. They needed me now. After a lifetime of being the less valued daughter, I held the keys to their salvation. The question was, would I use that power for revenge, for justice, or for something else entirely? Would you forgive family who betrayed you if they were truly desperate for your help? Or would their desperation feel like sweet justice after years of being treated as second best? As I weighed my options, I realized this decision would define not just my relationship with my family, but the person I had become in their absence. A week after the video call, I found myself sitting in a corner booth at Elliott's, an upscale seafood restaurant near Seattle's waterfront. I'd chosen a public location, neutral territory, where I could leave if things became too intense. I arrived 30 minutes early to compose myself and strategically selected a seat facing the entrance. I wanted to see them before they saw me. Derek had offered to come for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. Still, he had helped me prepare, role-playing potential scenarios, and reminding me that I was negotiating from a position of strength. "Remember," he'd said as I left our apartment, "you don't owe them anything. Whatever you decide should be because it's what you want, not because of obligation or guilt." I spotted them the moment they entered. My mother scanning the restaurant anxiously, my father looking diminished in a suit that seemed too large for him now, Lauren trailing slightly behind, her designer handbag a jarring contrast to her worried expression. They didn't look like the confident, polished family that had dismissed my concerns 3 years ago. They looked broken. My mother saw me first. Her face registered shock before she composed herself. I realized she was reacting to my appearance. Gone was the insecure girl they had known. In her place was a confident woman with a Seattle-appropriate bob haircut, professional attire, and most importantly, eyes that no longer sought approval. "Cassandra," she said as they reached the table. She moved as if to hug me, then stopped herself when I didn't rise. "You look different." "It's been 3 years," I replied evenly. "Please sit down." They arranged themselves awkwardly across from me. A waiter approached, and I ordered a glass of wine. My parents both requested water. Lauren asked for a double scotch. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," my father began once the waiter left. "We know this isn't easy." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. But I'm curious to hear exactly what you're proposing." My directness seemed to throw them. They had perhaps expected the same emotional, easily manipulated daughter they remembered. "We need your signature on several documents," my father explained, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "The company headquarters needs to be sold to cover immediate debts. We also need to restructure the remaining assets, which requires your authorization as per the original company charter." "And what do I get in return?" I asked calmly. My mother looked startled. "Well, it's still a family matter, Cassandra. We thought you'd want to help preserve what's left of your grandfather's legacy. My grandfather's legacy, I repeated slowly. The same legacy you all ensured I would have no part in? The legacy that was supposed to include my future, but was redirected to Lauren when Grandpa was too ill to know what he was signing. That's not fair, Lauren interjected, her voice rising. I tried to make the business better. I had plans, vision. And yet here we are. I cut her off. The business failing, clients fleeing, and the three of you flying across the country to beg for my help. The waiter returned with our drinks, creating a momentary pause in the tension. When he left, my father tried a different approach. We understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But this isn't just about us. There are 43 employees whose livelihoods depend on saving what's left of the company. It was a calculated appeal to my conscience, and I hated that it partially worked. I did care about the innocent employees caught in my family's web of incompetence and greed. What exactly happened with Bradley? I asked Lauren directly. Dad mentioned falsified paperwork. She flinched, then took a large swallow of scotch. He saw the business as an ATM, not a legacy. When investments started underperforming, he began covering it up, moving money between accounts, creating fake returns, promising clients impossible yields. And you didn't notice? Her eyes filled with tears. I trusted him. Like I trusted all of you growing up when you told me I was special, destined for success. I never learned to question anything because everything was always handed to me. It was perhaps the most honest thing I'd ever heard my sister say. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the damage that being the golden child had done to her, the constant pressure to perform, the absence of resilience that comes from never facing real challenges, the inability to recognize genuine problems until they became catastrophic. We should have listened to you more, my mother said quietly. Your grandfather always said you had good judgment. Better than any of us. The compliment years too late landed hollow. Did Grandpa really change his will voluntarily? I asked, fixing my eyes on my father. Tell me the truth. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, my father spoke, his voice barely audible. Howard was very confused near the end. The medications, he had good days and bad days. We presented the changes when he was more suggestible. Dad. Lauren looked horrified. She deserves the truth, he replied tiredly. We've lost everything else. Might as well lose the pretense too. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. We thought we were doing what was best for the family. Lauren had the business degree, the connections. You were pursuing art conservation, a lovely hobby, but not a real career. We truly believed Lauren would grow the business and take care of you. It wasn't your decision to make, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. And art conservation isn't a hobby. I'm building a successful business of my own now. No thanks to any of you. We can make it right, my father said desperately. Once we stabilize the company. The company can't be saved, I interrupted. Not in its current form. I've spent the past week consulting with financial analysts and lawyers. Even with my signature on those documents, Transcend Investments has lost too much client trust. The lawsuits alone would sink what remains. Their faces fell as the reality of my words sank in. Lauren's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Then what's the point of even meeting? My mother asked bitterly. Because I'm offering an alternative, I replied. But it comes with conditions. I pulled out my own folder and slid several documents across the table. This is my proposal. My signature in exchange for 3 things. First, a formal acknowledgement that Grandpa's will was changed under duress and that his original intentions were to provide for my future. Second, the return of specific items of sentimental value, particularly his art collection and the items from the lake house that he specifically wanted me to have. Third, I want a role in whatever emerges from this disaster. What kind of role? My father asked cautiously. I've established connections with several ethical investment advisors here in Seattle. They're willing to consider absorbing what remains of Grandpa's client list and some of the staff. I would serve as family liaison, ensuring the transition preserves as much of his original vision as possible. You're talking about dismantling the company, Lauren said, aghast. The company is already dismantled. I replied firmly. I'm talking about salvaging what can be saved with integrity. My parents exchanged glances. My father looked defeated, but also somehow relieved. There's one more condition, I added. Family therapy. All of us. If we're going to have any relationship moving forward, we need to address the damage that's been done. Therapy. My mother looked scandalized. That's hardly necessary. It's non-negotiable, I interrupted. Take my offer or find another solution. Though I doubt you'll find one, given the legal constraints and mounting debts. The three of them huddled together, whispering urgently. I sat back and sipped my wine, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I was dictating terms to my family rather than desperately seeking their approval. Finally, my father turned to me. We need time to review these documents with our lawyers. Of course, I replied. You have 48 hours. After that, I withdraw my offer and return to Seattle. And if we agree? Lauren asked, her voice small. Then I'll fly back next week. We'll meet with my financial advisors, sign the necessary paperwork, and begin the process of transition and reconciliation, in that order. As we prepared to leave, my mother reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. You've changed, Cassandra. I met her eyes steadily. Yes. I built myself back up after you all tore me down. That changes a person. Walking out of the restaurant, I felt neither triumph nor anger, just a weighted sadness for what our family had become and cautious hope for what it might still be, if built on more honest foundations. In the hotel lobby, I texted Derek. It's done. They'll likely agree to my terms. His response came immediately. Proud of you. This is what taking back your power looks like. He was right. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt like I was honoring his true legacy, not just the business he built, but the values of integrity and fairness he had tried to instill in me. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. Looking out at Seattle's rain-washed streets, I wondered if this was what closure felt like. Not the absence of pain, but the ability to move forward carrying both the wounds and the wisdom they had brought. I've learned that family betrayal cuts the deepest because it violates our most fundamental trust. Have you experienced a moment when family members who once dismissed you suddenly needed your help? Would you have made the same choice I did? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to hear how my family's desperate need for my signature ultimately transformed our relationships in ways none of us could have imagined. While my family deliberated over my terms, I wasn't sitting idle. The moment I'd ended that first video call with them, I'd known I needed more information than they would willingly provide. Their sudden need for my signature felt too convenient, their story too simplified. 3 years of silence followed by desperate pleas for help. There had to be more to the story. The morning after receiving my mother's call, I'd contacted Eliza Fernandez, a private investigator recommended by one of my restoration clients who worked in corporate security. She specialized in financial investigations and had experience with family business disputes. I need to know exactly what I'm walking into, I explained during our initial consultation. The complete financial picture, any legal issues they're not disclosing, and most importantly, whether my signature could make me liable for their mistakes. Eliza had taken my retainer and promised results within 10 days. She delivered in 7. We met at her office in downtown Seattle, a surprisingly warm space with plants in the windows and abstract art on the walls, not the stark, film noir setting I'd half expected. The situation is worse than your family indicated, she said, sliding a thick folder across her desk, but also more complicated in ways that might actually benefit you. According to Eliza's investigation, Transcend Investments was carrying nearly $12 million in debt, more than double what my family had admitted. Client lawsuits totaled another $8 million, with more likely coming. The SEC investigation my mother had mentioned briefly was actually a formal inquiry into potential securities fraud, focusing primarily on Bradley's activities, but potentially implicating Lauren as well. Your sister's husband moved client funds into his own development projects without proper disclosure, Eliza explained. Classic self-dealing. When those projects started failing, He created false statements showing phantom returns. Did Laura know? I asked, thinking of my sister's tearful claim of ignorance. Eliza's expression was neutral. The evidence is mixed. She signed documents she shouldn't have, but Bradley's digital fingerprints are on the most egregious fraud. She was either complicit or negligent in her oversight. Either way, my perfect sister had fallen spectacularly from grace. But the most interesting discovery came from Eliza's deep dive into my grandfather's records. She had tracked down and interviewed his former personal assistant, Marion Ellis, who had retired shortly after his death. Marion had copies of correspondence your grandfather kept separate from his official business files, Eliza said, pulling out several emails and handwritten notes. He was apparently concerned about your family's increasing focus on quick profits over client relationships. In the year before his stroke, he was quietly consulting with attorneys about restructuring the company leadership. I scanned the documents, my heart pounding as I recognized my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Increasingly concerned about Robert and Diana's influence on Lauren. They're pushing her toward aggressive growth strategies that contradict our core philosophy. Cassandra understands the balance between profit and purpose. Need to accelerate her involvement before retirement. Asterisk. Another note, dated just 3 months before his stroke. Meeting with Walsh about the succession plan. Lauren has technical skills but lacks judgment. Cassandra has the vision and integrity this company needs for the next generation. Dual leadership structure the best path forward. Asterisk. These private thoughts confirmed what I'd always sensed. My grandfather had valued my perspective and had been planning a role for me alongside, not beneath my sister. Even more significantly, Eliza had located Jeffrey Thornton, the lawyer who had handled the revised will. After leaving the law firm where he'd worked when handling my grandfather's case, he'd moved to Arizona and established his own practice. Under pressure from Eliza's persistent questioning and faced with evidence of potential ethical violations, he had made a remarkable admission. He acknowledged that your grandfather was not fully lucid when the will was changed, Eliza reported. He claims your father assured him that your grandfather had verbally expressed these wishes earlier, when he was more coherent, but Thornton admits he never directly confirmed this with your grandfather himself. That's legal malpractice, I said, stunned by the admission. Potentially, yes. Which is why he provided this. Eliza handed me a sworn statement in which Thornton detailed the circumstances of the will's modification, including the fact that my father had specifically instructed him not to contact my grandfather's regular attorney, Mr. Walsh, about the changes. But the most shocking revelation came in the form of a single document Eliza had discovered during her investigation of the company records. It was a codicil to my grandfather's will, properly executed and notarized 6 months before his stroke, but never mentioned during the will reading. This was buried in the company's secure document storage, Eliza explained. It was never filed with the main will. The codicil stated explicitly that regardless of any future changes to his will, certain specific items were to go directly to me, his collected artwork, his library of rare books, personal journals, and most significantly, a separate investment account containing just over $2 million, designated for my professional development and business endeavors. This account still exists, Eliza confirmed, showing me the statements. It was never merged with the main estate or the business assets. Legally, it belongs to you and has nothing to do with the current business crisis. I stared at the papers, hands shaking. They knew about this. They had to know. Almost certainly, Eliza agreed. The codicil was in the company's records. Someone made a deliberate decision not to disclose it. The implications were staggering. Not only had my family manipulated my grandfather's will during his final illness, but they had also actively suppressed a legal document that would have provided for me independently of the main inheritance. Armed with this information, I consulted with Catherine Winters, an attorney specializing in estate disputes. After reviewing Eliza's findings, she was blunt in her assessment. You have grounds for a significant lawsuit against both your family members personally and the law firm that handled the compromised will, she told me. The suppression of the codicil alone is actionable, not to mention the questionable circumstances of the will change. What about the current situation? I asked. Their need for my signature? Catherine smiled slightly. That puts you in an extraordinarily strong negotiating position. They need you far more than you need them. Together, we crafted a comprehensive legal strategy that would protect my interests while potentially salvaging what could be saved of my grandfather's business legacy. It included claiming my rightful inheritance as specified in the codicil, addressing the suppressed funds, and establishing clear boundaries around any involvement I might have in the business restructuring. What about criminal charges? I asked. For the will tampering, the fraud? Catherine considered this carefully. That's ultimately your decision. There's enough evidence to pursue criminal fraud charges against Bradley certainly, and possibly against your family, for the will suppression. But criminal proceedings would likely destroy any hope of recovering significant assets or preserving client relationships. I thought about this for several days, discussing it extensively with Derek. The discovery of my family's deeper betrayal had reopened wounds I thought had scarred over, but it had also clarified my path forward. They took more from you than even you realized, Derek said as we walked along the Seattle waterfront one evening. You have every right to pursue the harshest consequences. But what would that accomplish, really? I asked, watching the ferries cross the Sound. More destruction? More loss? Only you can decide if justice means punishment or restoration, he replied. What would honor your grandfather's true legacy? That question guided my final decision. The night before meeting my family again, I called Dr. Sloan, my therapist, for a special session. I'm standing at a crossroads, I explained. I can destroy them or try to rebuild something new from the ashes. What feels like healing to you? She asked simply. The answer came with surprising clarity. Not revenge, but reclamation. Not punishment, but truth. Not destroying what remained of my family, but transforming our relationship into something honest at last. The next morning, I met with Catherine one final time to review our strategy before my family arrived. Remember, she said as we concluded, you're negotiating from strength, not desperation. Don't let emotional appeals undermine your position. I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm. I know exactly what I want now, and more importantly, what my grandfather would have wanted. Armed with the truth, legal documentation, and a clear vision for moving forward, I prepare to face my family for what would be either our final confrontation or the beginning of a very different relationship. Derek hugged me before I left for the meeting. Whatever happens in there, you've already won. You found your strength without them. With those words bolstering me, I headed to the offices of Walsh and Associates, where my family waited, unaware that I now knew far more than they had ever intended me to discover. The conference room at Walsh and Associates felt smaller than I remembered. Perhaps it was the presence of more people, my parents and Lauren, of course, but also Mr. Walsh himself, looking significantly older than during our last encounter, Catherine Winters, my attorney, and Eliza Fernandez, whose investigative findings sat in a neat folder before me. Derek waited in the reception area, respecting my need to handle this myself, but close enough for support afterward. My family had arrived together, presenting a united front despite the tension evident in their postures. Lauren avoided my gaze, staring instead at her clasped hands. My father attempted confidence, but couldn't quite manage it. My mother alternated between nervous glances at me and reassuring touches to Lauren's arm. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, a tailored charcoal suit that projected professionalism rather than emotionality. My grandfather's watch, one of the few keepsakes I'd managed to secure before leaving, encircled my wrist. Its steady ticking reminded me of his practical nature, his belief in facing reality squarely. Thank you all for coming, I began, taking control of the meeting immediately. I've had time to thoroughly review the situation with my advisors, and I'm prepared to discuss terms for moving forward. We've reviewed your proposal, my father said, sliding a document across the table. We're prepared to accept your conditions with some minor adjustments to the timeline. I didn't touch the paper. Instead, I opened Eliza's folder and removed the codicil. Before we discuss that, I said evenly, I'd like to address this document. Are you familiar with it? The color drained from my father's face. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Lauren looked confused. Where did you get that? My father asked hoarsely. From the company's secure document storage, I replied, where it was deliberately hidden after Grandpa's death. Mr. Walsh adjusted his glasses and examined the document. His expression darkened. This is Howard's handwriting and signature. It's properly notarized. Why wasn't this presented with the will? My mother looked desperately at my father, who seemed unable to speak. Perhaps, Catherine suggested into the silence, because it explicitly provides for Ms. Bennet regardless of any subsequent changes to the main will, including changes made under questionable circumstances during Mr. Bennet's final illness. We didn't think it was relevant anymore. My father finally managed. The revised will superseded everything. That's not how codicils work, as you well know, Mr. Bennet, Catherine replied coldly. This document specifically states its provisions are to be honored regardless of future will changes. I turned to Lauren, whose confusion had given way to shock. Did you know about this? She shook her head slowly.
No.
I swear, Cassandra, I didn't. For once, I believed her. The betrayal had been our parents' doing, with Lauren as both beneficiary and pawn. There's more, I continued, placing Jeffrey Thornton's sworn statement on the table. The lawyer who handled Grandpa's revised will has provided this statement about the circumstances under which it was changed. As my father scanned the document, his face crumpled. He had no right. He had every legal and ethical obligation, Catherine interrupted, especially once evidence of potential elder abuse came to light. My mother began to weep quietly. We were trying to protect the family legacy. Lauren had the education, the connections. You were pursuing a hobby that has now become my successful business, I interjected firmly. A business I built without the resources Grandpa intended for me to have. I placed a third document on the table, Eliza's comprehensive report on the current state of the family business. This is the complete financial and legal situation of Transcend Investments, including the SEC investigation, client lawsuits, and Bradley's fraudulent activities. It's considerably worse than what you disclosed to me. Lauren finally looked up, her face pale. How did you get all this information? I did what you should have done years ago, I replied. I investigated thoroughly before making decisions that would affect people's lives. The room fell silent as the full weight of my knowledge settled over them. They had come expecting to negotiate from a position of controlled desperation. Instead, they faced someone who understood the complete extent of their deception and failure. So, what happens now? My father asked, his voice hollow. Are you pressing charges? Suing us? It was the moment I had rehearsed most carefully in my mind. The crossroads Dr. Sloan and I had discussed. Punishment or restoration. Destruction or transformation. I'm offering a way forward, I said, my voice softening slightly. But it requires complete honesty from this point on. No more manipulation. No more secrets. I outlined my terms, more comprehensive than my initial proposal, but still focused on salvaging what could be saved. First, the immediate transfer of the assets specified in the codicil, including the $2 million investment account that should have been mine 3 years ago. Second, a restructuring of the family business under the guidance of a financial recovery team I had already vetted, with me serving as client liaison given my grandfather's original intention for me to be involved in leadership. Third, a formal acknowledgement of the manipulation of my grandfather's will and the suppression of the codicil, documented legally, but not pursued as criminal charges if full cooperation was given. Fourth, the return of all items of sentimental value, particularly my grandfather's art collection and personal effects. And finally, mandatory family therapy, not as a punitive measure, but as the only path toward any potential relationship moving forward. In return, I concluded, I will sign the necessary documents to allow the business restructuring to proceed, and I will dedicate significant effort to salvaging client relationships. Many of Grandpa's original clients respected him deeply. That goodwill can still be leveraged, but only with absolute transparency about what happened and how it's being corrected. My father started to object, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Lauren, surprisingly, was the first to respond. It's fair, she said quietly. More than fair, considering what we did. Lauren, my father protested.
No, Dad.
Enough. Her voice strengthened. We took everything from Cassandra. We lied about Grandpa's wishes. I failed spectacularly at running the business. And now she's offering us a way out that's better than we deserve. Lauren turned to face me directly for the first time. I was jealous of you. Did you know that? Everyone thought I had everything, the grades, the popularity, the business acumen. But Grandpa loved you differently. He respected you. With me, it was always about achievement, about living up to expectations. With you, it was about who you were as a person. Her honesty startled me. It had never occurred to me that the golden child might envy the black sheep. When they suggested changing the will, she continued, I convinced myself it was because I deserved it more. I'd worked harder, prepared more. But really, I just wanted what you had with him. And I thought maybe if I had his company, his money, I'd somehow get that too. Tears spilled down her cheeks.
I'm sorry, Cassandra.
Truly sorry. The apology I'd fantasized about for years landed differently than I'd imagined. There was no triumphant vindication, just a sad recognition of how thoroughly our family had damaged itself and each other. My parents' resistance crumbled in the face of Lauren's admission. My mother reached for my hand across the table. I didn't pull away. We were wrong, she whispered. So terribly wrong. Over the next 3 hours, we hammered out the details of the agreement. Catherine ensured every point was legally sound. Mr. Walsh, clearly disturbed by his firm's unwitting role in the deception, offered additional resources to facilitate the business restructuring. When the final documents were prepared, I signed my name alongside theirs, not as the family disappointment begging for scraps, but as an equal partner in creating something new from the ashes of betrayal. As we prepared to leave, my father hesitated, then removed a small box from his briefcase. I brought this, he said, placing it before me. I shouldn't have kept it. Inside was my grandfather's signet ring. The one he had always said would be mine someday. I slipped it onto my finger, where it sat slightly loose, but somehow right. He would be proud of you, my father said softly, for finding a better way than the rest of us could see. 1 year later, the transformed family business, now called Bennett Legacy Advisors, was slowly rebuilding its reputation under a new structure. The more aggressive investment branch had been sold to cover debts, while the core financial planning services remained, now with an emphasis on ethical investing and transparency. Lauren, after completing an intensive course in ethics and financial responsibility, worked under the supervision of a mentor from the recovery team. Her natural intelligence, freed from the pressure to chase ever-increasing returns, found expression in developing sustainable investment strategies. My parents, semi-retired now and living in a modest condo after selling both houses to settle debts, were slowly earning back my trust through consistent therapy and genuine efforts to understand the damage their favoritism had caused. As for me, I divided my time between my growing art conservation business in Seattle and monthly visits to oversee client relations at Bennett Legacy. The $2 million investment account from the codicil had funded both the expansion of my studio and a scholarship program for aspiring conservators who lacked financial resources. Derek and I bought a house with a dedicated studio space and room enough for the art collection that had finally been returned to me. Grandpa's paintings hung alongside photographs of our blended family, still healing, still learning, but no longer built on lies. On what would have been my grandfather's 85th birthday, I sat alone in my studio, examining a small landscape he had purchased on our first museum trip together. As I carefully cleaned decades of grime from its surface, revealing the luminous colors beneath, I thought about how appropriate the work was as a metaphor for our family's journey. The original beauty had always been there, hidden under layers of deception, competition, and fear. The cleaning was painstaking, requiring patience and specialized knowledge. Some damage could never be completely undone. But what emerged, though changed, had its own authentic value. I didn't get the inheritance as originally promised. Instead, I gained something more valuable: the strength that comes from building a life on your own terms, the wisdom to choose healing over revenge, and the freedom of being appreciated for exactly who you are. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Family dinner still on for Sunday? I'm bringing those cookies you liked last time. I smiled and texted back. Wouldn't miss it. Some betrayals can never be entirely erased. But sometimes, if we're brave enough to face the truth and wise enough to choose compassion over revenge, they can become the foundation for something stronger than what was lost. Have you ever had to choose between justice and healing in your own family relationships? I found that the most powerful revenge wasn't making my family suffer, but creating a life and relationship on my terms instead of theirs. If my story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and find strength in our shared experiences. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, betrayal, and the complicated path to healing. And if you know someone struggling with family betrayal who might need to hear this message of hope beyond revenge, please share this video with them. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.